Then to accelerate on our investment agenda in European defense. These were the two topics of our exchange today. I had the opportunity to say it again yesterday to the French people. We have entered a new era, and, faced with the growing uncertainties, Europeans must somehow create their own certainty. First of all, for Ukraine, this was the subject of our discussion with President Zelensky, the conclusions adopted, and then the discussion tonight, and obviously for the security of Europeans in the short term, and more structurally through the plan that we have adopted. In this regard, I would like to thank the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, for allowing this exchange, and his decisions of the day, and President von der Leyen for the plan that has been submitted to us. Indeed, the moment we are living in is serious for Europe. Everyone is aware of it, and we have made strong choices from day one to support Ukraine in the face of Russia's war of aggression, and in doing so to support its independence and freedom. And the ones that are being played out in Ukraine are obviously the security and sovereignty of this country, but it is also our security at all. This European Council, therefore, has approved the continuation of European financial and military support for Ukraine, and some fundamental principles that must guide us on the path to a solid and lasting peace. And as such, the main principles that we had adopted at the Paris meeting on February 17, then confirmed in London, have been validated by all. We want peace for Ukraine and by Ukraine, and the Ukrainians want it even more. President Zelensky himself said it again this afternoon. We want a solid and lasting peace, that is to say a peace that guarantees the sovereignty of Ukraine. And that is not a bounty for the aggressor, nor a capitulation, nor a ceasefire without guarantees. An experience that we have already lived in 2014, I also recalled yesterday. That is why the idea of a sequence that we supported in direct connection with President Zelensky, with Prime Minister Sarmer and Chancellor Scholz, was discussed at length today and approved by all. The idea that we should first move towards a truce that allows it to be measured and verified, a truce in the air, at sea and on civilian infrastructure, which can then make it possible to discuss what constitutes security guarantees in the broadest sense, which range from the strengthening of the Ukrainian army to the presence of European or non-European forces on Ukrainian soil, to other types of guarantees. As such, I invited all the colleagues who wished to participate in the meeting to be held in Paris on March 11 with our chiefs of staff. As such and beyond, the priority is obviously to support Ukraine and its army in the very short term. These are the choices that we have all made in a coordinated manner in recent days, by strengthening or accelerating the aid packages already decided or by mobilizing our main operators to face the most burning needs of the Ukrainian army. In 2025, the European Union will provide Ukraine with 30.6 billion euros under the Ukraine Facility, and the G7 HERA initiative, financed by, as you know, the interests of Russian fixed assets. And we confirmed the readiness of the Europeans to urgently increase our military support to Ukraine, and to meet its most pressing material needs, also examining all initiatives to achieve this. Beyond these short-term elements, this European Council has decided to accelerate investment in support of European defense. And this in direct connection with the context that I have just recalled, and because the analysis shared by all the member states is indeed that Russia, as I also reminded the French yesterday, constitutes an existential threat for all Europeans in the long term, and therefore also for France. We are also convinced, and we respect that many of our historical allies today have other priorities than Europe, and that, indeed, we will no longer be able to receive the dividends of peace. It is this observation that led us, as early as 2017, to launch an unprecedented strategic exercise. Then to have 2 military programming laws passed, which will have led to doubling the budget of the French armies. But, after the awakening of the Versailles Agenda, deciding on strategic autonomy for Europeans. These are now decisions that mark the passage to action on the defense front. With the Commission's loan of 150 billion euros guaranteed from the Union budget, The member states will be able to be lent at the best market conditions for financing that will allow short-term equipment, and therefore more immediately. The subsequent decision on more flexible rules of the Stability and Growth Pact will make it possible to free up defense investments at national level by the member states. Several programs of the European budget, in particular the structural funds, are reprioritized by the Commission. In order to be able to be used, they're also on defense expenditures. The European Investment Bank is mobilized on its assets and its activities. And obviously European savings, which we know to be abundant, will also be used and will be mobilized for the European defense industrial base, in particular by the Capital Markets Union. All these short-term actions, and I thank the Commission once again for this work, have been validated. We have also given additional guidelines for the White Paper, which will be finalized by mid-March, and which will then make it possible to prepare additional decisions, in particular on financing. Because beyond the very short-term measure of the 150 billion loan, we must indeed find more sustainable joint financing. I have been able to make several proposals on this, and I could come back to it if you wish in the questions. What also matters to me is the method behind it. It is that we obviously need to spend more, to invest more in our defense. But what we support is that these expenses are not the purchase of off-the-shelf equipment, which, again, would be non-European equipment. And as you know, this is what France has been supporting for several years, which has also been acted on there. Which implies defining priority areas, those on which we have either dependencies or competition between European and non-European solutions, air defense and anti-missile. Artillery systems including deep strike capabilities, missiles and ammunition, drones and anti-drone systems. Strategic facilitators which include for space and the protection of critical infrastructures, military mobility, cyber, artificial intelligence and electronic warfare. In these areas, the method is to identify the best entrepreneurs and the best companies that we have, the already existing programs. Try to accelerate their pace and increase their production capacity, and ask each member state to review the current orders. To see if it can prioritize European orders, go back on the rules that are now too cumbersome award procedures, and therefore simplify the rules for awarding these contracts. Also go back on the very expensive and uncompetitive rules of geographical return that exist for many of our programs. The space being undoubtedly one of the first tests, and I say it, a day of European space success with the launch of Ariane 6. So here we are, and it is a real burst of European investment that has been decided today, which is therefore only a step before the white paper of additional decisions that will come this semester at Council level, but a deeper articulation, as you have understood, of our European industrial and technological defense base. These decisions, for me, are a key element of what I called for yesterday of my wishes, and what we are also mobilizing on at national level. That is to say, given the threat, and whatever happens in Ukraine, we need to increase our defense capabilities. And we need to build on the next few years' autonomous defense capabilities for Europeans. I welcome the choices that have been made today, but also the very broad consensus that has emerged from our exchanges, and which, in my eyes, marks a great lucidity on the part of Europeans and a profound strategic awakening. So, in the coming weeks, we will have to draw all the consequences on the economic level at the next Council, on the defense and security level in the coming weeks by new decisions. I will now answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. President. Francesco Fontamaggi for Agence France Presse. You mentioned this meeting of the chiefs of staff of the countries that are ready to provide guarantees within the framework of a peace agreement in Ukraine, if it happens, which will take place on Tuesday. As I understand it, you have also invited heads of state and government to participate. Can you tell us how many countries are ready to participate in this meeting and beyond in the coalition for these security guarantees? And so, is the coalition, the Franco-British or French plan, supported by the British, I don't know what to call it, starting to take shape? Can you tell us where this is at, and when you will be ready to present it again to President Trump, especially in Washington? And on this point, have you been able to make progress on the backstop? the possible safety net that many countries are demanding from the United States, in order to be able to commit themselves to providing guarantees. Thank you. Thank you very much. On the initiative that we have taken in conjunction with President Zelensky, with Prime Minister Sarmer, also with Chancellor Skull. It is several colleagues who are in support, and here I would also like to thank Norway, the Netherlands, and several others. Basically, we tried by a series of sequences that were built up to avoid a ceasefire that would be negotiated hastily, without any guarantees. And so this proposal for a sequence, it has been discussed constantly during the last few days by exchanges with our Ukrainian friends, with President Trump and his teams. So you have seen it from next week, and this is a very good thing. There will be a resumption of discussions that will be done. And so the idea is that they can move forward during the talks that will resume at the negotiating level in Saudi Arabia from the beginning of next week. And so, for the first time since the beginning of this process, which was also one of our objectives, there is indeed a process that exists between the United States and Ukraine at the level of these negotiators, in order to be able to move forward on this scheme. And so we are moving forward in a concrete way to see what is accepted by each other, and so that, in fact, this sequence, which makes it possible to build first a measurable truce, then the conditions for guaranteeing security, confidence-building measures, and in the end a lasting peace can be followed. And so it's in real time sort of now, but there wouldn't be any hidden plans or plans that would be prepared. The action takes place every day, and therefore the contacts are permanent. I had a bilateral conversation with President Zelensky on this topic earlier. Just before meeting you after the council, I had an exchange with Minister Starmer. And we will have the Americans in the next few hours. So we are moving forward, and we will see what happens to progress in the coming days at the level of the negotiators, so in Riyadh. On then, what is called security guarantee. We have to see where we start from. The Russians have made it very clear what their will is. They said this during the negotiations that took place in Istanbul in the spring of 2022, and it was recalled by several officials. Not as much, no foreign army, and a demilitarization of Ukraine, that the Russians want to see as an army, a neutral country, which means a very small army format. These conditions are obviously unacceptable for the Ukrainians, but for all of us, because it is somehow recreating. And I would say empire, the conditions of 2014. And for sure, it is allowing Russia to take a few years to reorganize and launch an operation again. That would threaten the security and sovereignty of Ukraine, and in doing so, ours. And so, when we say security guarantee, there are, if I may say so, several options that exist. First of all, we must say, we all support the need for a Ukrainian army of size, and such as to be able to resist Russian aggression. That is to say, an army format of several 100,000 men, with better quality equipment. And in particular a solar defense, and a whole category of capabilities that make it possible to resist. On this point, I think I can say that there is unanimity among the allies. I have not heard any of the allies, that is to say Europeans and non-Europeans, say, we do not want to participate in these security guarantees. There is really a very strong consensus, everyone agrees. Then there is the idea of saying, as there's an American refusal today to join NATO. The best guarantee of security is membership in NATO. We support her. These are membership-type mechanisms in NATO. Several countries or commentators have proposed Article 5 mechanisms or solidarities. So far, the United States of America has refused all these OTANian-type mechanisms. And so there is another category, which consists of deploying on a totally national basis and on totally national decisions. A series of armies, not on the front line, not in the occupied zone, but the day after peace in precisely calm areas. Their armies to fully secure it, mark a strategic signature, and create a de facto solidarity of NATO member nations. And so this is one of the schemes that has been worked on in Franco-British, expanded to others, and there are several countries. And you are right that for all of them, the condition is the nature of American support. And so there will be first exploratory discussions on this whole range of options that will be held. With the chiefs of staff of all the Allied armies, they will all be solicited. And so it will then be up to everyone to mobilize, at the desired level, in close coordination with NATO, and the NATO Military Command, which will also be associated with this approach. And so here, the idea is to give maximum visibility to the Ukrainians, and also to signal the nature of our support. All countries will be invited on Tuesday, since the first floor is really unanimous, as I said. And so what is important for us in the work too, is the technical work that will be carried out. This is not at the level of the heads of state and government. I think I would probably say a few words since we are on the initiative. But it is also technically to see what type of organization, and what cost for a lasting support of a Ukrainian army, to a credible format. And these are works that have not begun. So they have to be led. No, the goal is for the work to continue, and therefore, we will then continue in close connection with NATO and each other. But all this will be done in complete transparency. And besides, there will undoubtedly be American command representatives, at least from NATO, who will allow this information to be shared. Good evening, Mr. President. Philippe Ricard for the World. Speaking about tonight's debates, can you tell us your ideas about the additional innovative financing that you would like to see as part of the White Booklet on defense at community level? Is it, for example, a large new European loan, a special intergovernmental vehicle? Are these ideas that you have already discussed, in particular with Friedrich Merz, the future German Chancellor? And do you know what he already thinks about them? That's it. And then with regard to what you said yesterday about the French nuclear deterrent, which you propose to expand, let's say, at the disposal of other European states. Have you discussed this with your European Council counterparts this evening? What were their questions on the subject? How do you see things in fact, this debate evolving? Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, I think that today we are using, as you can clearly see, what was not taken, both from the previous plan and from other existing unused funds. And so the Commission did the right thing. She reacted very quickly, on a legal basis that allowed her to do this and to mobilize her funding. And so it is very useful because it allows quick decisions, quick orders, and therefore to accelerate the programs that are now in the hands of our major industrialists in Europe. But that's not enough. What we are going to support is indeed the idea that then we can have joint financing, because I think that the freedom, the budgetary space that is left at national level is not a satisfactory solution, because there are many differences between the member states. And if we really want to have major European programs and have a European industrial base, we need European funding. And so what we are going to support is indeed that we can move towards innovative financing. So, some propose to have ESM as an underlying, but I, for my part, am in favor of looking at this solution, but also of looking at that of a European loan for defense, which would also make it possible more broadly to look for the financing of major defense efforts as artificial intelligence, the two being linked and both being key for our strategic sovereignty and our autonomy. And I think that such financing is all the more relevant because it would make it possible to step over what is going to happen very quickly on our economies, which is the beginning of the repayment of the loan made during the COVID period, which will arrive from 2028. And so you can clearly see that the challenge for our countries today is to increase their national financing on priority topics, their major investments, including defense. But it is not to, in a way, respond to the repayment of loans that date from yesterday. We need to give ourselves depth of field. And when we look at the aggregate level of the European Union, or even the Eurozone, we have an underindebtedness of this space, compared to the United States of America, which gives us a lot of space. And I insist on this, the next 5 to 10 years, the Draghi report and the State report have shown this very well. And the geopolitical situation is accelerating this. These are the 5 to 10 years when we have massive investments to make. If we Europeans want to rise to the height of the threat, if we want to meet the investment needs in artificial intelligence, because the race is now, and if we want to meet the challenges of decarbonizing our economies, on precisely all the so-called green technologies. And so the priority is to mobilize joint financing to do it now, and instead have repayment deadlines that will come when we have passed this hump, if I may say so, and when we have secured equipment that allows us to be credible for ourselves when we will reap the dividends of decarbonization, because in a few years, we will have these dividends. We are investing heavily in our interconnections, in our networks, in our nuclear and renewable programs. All this will allow us to be much less dependent on the cost of fossils. And so that, we will have the dividend, if I may say so, or the return on investment, in 5 to 10 years. And so I think that the right solution for the Europeans is indeed to massively mobilize financing through joint markets, to show this common signature, and to be able to do so in particular to go further in terms of defense. At the same time, I am in favor of there being own resources. I have mentioned several avenues tonight, including the famous digital tax, which has been mentioned for several years. I think the time is right to finally come to it, and it should be a European own resource. But we must also have our own resources to deal with this. We need a new jump, as we were able to do in the time of COVID. On all this, I have obviously started the discussion with the future Chancellor Merz. And so we are moving forward, our teams are exchanging in real time. And I think that this is indeed an important moment in the Franco-German convergence, and I will have the opportunity to exchange with him again in the coming weeks. And I saw anyway, between the COVID period and today, a lot of evolution on this subject. And you have also seen it yourself, many states or political leaders who were once totally hostile to any form of joint indebtedness support them if there are precisely the programs that I mentioned behind them. On the nuclear deterrent, I explained yesterday what he was talking about. What I proposed was to open a strategic conversation with the member states who were interested in making progress on this topic. Several of my colleagues came to see me. And so now, we are going to open a phase where our technicians will exchange. We will open a dialogue both strategic and technical. And exchanges will follow at the level of heads of state and government to see by the end of the semester if there are new cooperations that can emerge. All day long. But because I also responded to an invitation that existed. And this is normal. Nevertheless, let's look with lucidity at the situation that we have been living for the last 3 years. Why are the Europeans and all more broadly in this situation with regard to Ukraine? Because you have a nuclear power that is the aggressor. And so, quite legitimately, Europe must ask itself the question of nuclear diffusion for itself, in the broadest sense. Good evening, Mr. President. I am a Russian journalist in exile here in France, from the independent channel of Aosta. My name is Denis Katayev. Thank you to the French Republic for welcoming us here in Europe. And I have a question about the reaction. Mr. President, thank you for your efforts, and your initiatives inspire optimism, but by everyone, not for everyone. Have you heard the reaction of Moscow, for example? Mr. Putin was offended after your speech yesterday, and said, I quote him, "There are still people who want to go back to the time of Napoleon, forgetting how it ended." What do you think about this topic? And Mr. Trump too, he also reacted on the subject of NATO. I quote him, "My biggest problem with NATO is that if the United States had a problem, and we called France, do you think he just helped us?" That's Mr. Trump's question. What do you think of this reaction? And I have a more serious question, Mr. President. Legitimate Donald Trump today. Donald Trump legitimizes Mr. Putin. He restored relations with Mr. Putin, with Russia. But are you, as the leader of Europe today, personally ready to speak with Mr. Putin again? And when? Because that in Washington, you also mentioned that after Bocha, it is impossible. And now it is possible. And hasn't the time come yet to talk with Mr. Putin? Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. On your first question, I know President Putin well, so if he reacts like this, it is because he knows that I told the truth. And that I know that he can betray the agreements that he signs, and that he has already done so, that I am here to testify to this. Since we were with Chancellor Merkel, the guarantors, through the Normandy process, of the mine agreement that deliberately violated it. then I think that he is making a historical nonsense, and that amazes me about him. Napoleon was leading conquests. The only imperial power that I see today in Europe is called Russia. And he is a revisionist imperialist of the history and identity of peoples. And our will, is to be a power of peace and balance. Basically, everything we do through choices, including, moreover, arming ourselves to avoid tomorrow's war, are choices of peace. And so I think President Putin should come back to that vision. In any case, this is a historical nonsense. In the reference, it is undoubtedly that he was stung by the fact that we unmasked his game. If there is a ceasefire, it is not to make lasting peace, it will be to better resume the war. The question of whether France would come to help the United States of America, I will summon our centuries-old history. Lafayette came, Pershing made the journey in the opposite direction by summoning this memory. And I was, a few days ago, alongside American veterans who had made their way to Omaha Beach, and so many others have done so. We have always been there for each other. But dare I remind you that, not just the French, the Europeans were there when Afghanistan was sounded. And besides, we didn't politely warn them when Afghanistan is that. So we are loyal and faithful allies. Let anyone you doubt it, just look at the contemporary history that is ours. It simply justifies what we have for the United States of America, what I have for its leaders, respect and friendship. And I think we have the right to demand the same, because our history shows that we deserve it. And I am ready to speak to President Putin when we have considered, with both President Zelensky and our European partners, that it is the right time. But here, we are entering a phase of discussion, of talks, which, at some point, will fully justify that there should be discussions with the negotiators and the leaders. So the answer is yes. I'll take one last question before I go. Good evening, Mr. President. Leopold de Deber for BFM TV. In the continuation of what you have just said, there is a statement a few hours ago by Marco Rubio, US Secretary of State, on the depth of this war, where did it come from, etc. With this message that he said, that is to say that for him, we are in a war between the United States and Russia. In fact, Ukraine would only be a kind of proxy. That's the term he used on television. This is a rhetoric that is also used by Moscow. What is your reaction to this way of talking about those whom you still describe today obviously as our allies, but therefore? This kind of rhetoric which is changing, I thank you. I think it's inappropriate. First of all, I believe that this war was started unilaterally by Russia. There was no desire either from NATO, or from any ally, or from the Europeans, to threaten Russia's security through Ukraine. And I can tell you, and none of my predecessors would say otherwise, we have always taken care of this. And when proposals came, for example, to expand NATO, it was France and Germany who rejected it in 2008 in Bucharest. And it could not then be revisited. So has it been that in recent years, there has been some form of pressure, tension, or plans, as I sometimes hear, for expansion. That would have justified a Russian reaction. That's not true. This is a tale, a bad tale. There is only one aggressor, he is Russian, and he decided to do it out of imperialism, out of a desire to expand, and a desire to conquer the Ukraine. Remember, 3 years ago, we were told that this would be a special operation that would take 3 weeks. And this operation, moreover, was carried out in the east and from the north, with several 100,000 soldiers coming to Kiev, which was liberated, as well as the north of the country by the Ukrainians. Secondly, I think it is inappropriate to qualify this, because it somehow disrespects the Ukrainian officials. For 3 years, as far as I know, there have been no European or American fighters on Ukrainian soil. We helped, we financed, we gave capabilities, but the brave people who fought for their territory and for their sovereignty are the Ukrainians, not us, neither Americans nor Europeans. And so to somehow mean today that it would simply be a discussion between Americans and Russians, is to dispossess a people who resisted for their survival, their dignity, and their fight. I think that's not what we need to do. So no, this is a war of resistance by Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. That's just it. And I think we have to keep naming her well. Then, peace will involve first of all the Ukrainians, with the Russians around the table, but also the Europeans as they are supporters. And as it is also about European security, and obviously the Americans and the other allies who have come to their side, and who are important contributors financially and militarily. That's it. I think that by naming things well, we can find a useful solution, but otherwise we are moving sideways. I wanted to restore. I'm going to have to leave. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.